Hit it.
Evelyn, welcome back to the Left of Boom Show. It's great to see you again.
Hi, Phil. Happy to be here.
So today, Evelyn, we're continuing this series around the next 52 weeks. And for today's episode, we're going to talk about vulnerability assessment. And vulnerability assessment is really just talking about, are you going to be proactive or reactive? So assessing vulnerability is all about figuring out like what issues are there in my workplace, where are they, and then proactively responding to those. But the other big thing about vulnerability assessment, and this is particularly true for companies that are distributed, that have like a lot of locations, or there's a lot of other places that they could respond to. What are they doing to kind of figure out where they deploy resources in a way that is the most judicious? So maybe explain a little bit from your experience as a former organizer and now as a management side consultant. What do you see as kind of the positives, and also what do you see as some of the challenges that companies face when they're dealing with assessing vulnerability?
Well, as most of your listeners know, so as an ex-organizer, when I go into a company and I look at the things that the company is doing, I still see a lot of holes where a union can come in and try to, drum up interest. And so I do see that there's a lot of things that companies do where they're not truly focusing on the things that they should be focusing on in vulnerability assessments. They may be asking certain questions that does not give them a clear picture of if things are actually good at a place or how employees really truly feel about working there. I do see a lot of times where companies may do assessments or vulnerability assessments or employee engagement, and you do have a lot of like supervisors, managers that try to influence that so they don't look negative or bad. And so when I go into these companies and I'm looking at these things, I'm like, there's still a lot of holes that a union can use, or there's a lot of places a union can try to infiltrate and start organizing using some of those things.
Right. What are the kinds of things that companies do when they feel like they're assessing vulnerability, or they feel like that they're assessing engagement? What are some of the things that companies get wrong there?
So when they get wrong, it's certain questions that they ask. It's just very black and white. They're not getting into the emotional part of it. And a lot of this is emotional, if not all of it. It's just, do you think your pay is okay? Do you think this is okay? Instead of really going in and seeing what the root of the problem is. And they just kind of just over it. They're like, oh, well, we're good. And then they just move on without really kind of digging into it.
Yeah. I feel like, a lot of people think, well, look, we do an employee survey every year or every 2 years. That's how we measure engagement. And then we will respond to whatever comes up in that survey. And the problem with surveys, and even if you're doing them all the time, like the problem with the survey is that whatever moment in time you ask the questions, that moment is gone. So you're now responding to the moment that happened in the past. And that moment, if it happened, and a lot of surveys, you do the survey and it takes months to get the data back. And you're now action planning. And even if you're in the best case scenario, you're action planning and working on issues that were issues 2 or 3 months ago. But now my issue is this other issue. So there's a timing component to it. You've already raised what questions you ask is like a really, really important thing. Like surveys that don't have a lot of room for, let me explain my answer to your question. There's a lot of gray area in interpretation, and the thing that you think that I meant is not actually what I meant. And so there has to always be this additional feature of how are we listening to employees in between those spaces, right? It's not that surveys are never valuable information or that you shouldn't do them, but it's just you've got to get in front of people. Like you have to talk to people. And
you have to.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, it has to do with the different departments have different experiences. You have generational differences where, something makes sense to one generation because it's always been done that way. But then you have another generation that has a new way of looking at things. And so you really have to get down and talk to the people one-on-one, if it's in group settings, if it's, round tables, because a lot of times too, these, especially younger generations, everything's a survey in their life anyways. Right.
Hmm.
And so surveys sometimes lose that. I think the term is luster, where to them it's just a survey, check, 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 and that's it. Right.
Yeah.
And really having that communication with them, if it's roundtables, if it's, whatever, that face-to-face interaction is very important. And a lot of times people think this generation doesn't like the face-to-face, but they still do. They
Hmm.
still like to be listened to. It's a person, a visible person, and it just gives it that much more credibility in what you're doing.
I'm curious if you agree with this, but I think in some ways, face to face is actually more important because there's so much less of it these days.
Yeah,
I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
100%. Face to face is very important. That
Yeah.
hasn't changed. Same thing with, as an organizer. Now they just send out authorization cards, right? And anyone can sign an authorization card,
Hmm.
but you need that face to face, an organizer to them, to see if are you really on board with this, right? Because it's easy to click and just say yes, I accept and whatever, because that's what they're used to. But that
Yeah.
face to face interaction goes a really long way.
I think so face to face is important. I also think another component around vulnerability assessment is so like multiple channels. And
Mm-hmm.
also, so I really am a super strong believer in there should be a good, strong, regular check-in with your immediate boss. How are things going? What can we do better? What's next for you? Do you have what you need? Like those
Yeah.
are really important like questions, and that's a great place to start. Then there needs to be a way for supervisors to kind of raise those issues in the organization so that we as an organization can then start to see, is this a trend? Like, is this something that's happening across departments? Is this something
Mm-hmm.
that's really just in one particular department? And then the problem that you have if you just rely on those types of conversations is if you have a weak supervisor, you are only going to get to hear the things that they think are, good news, and you're not going to
Mm-hmm.
hear anything that might relate to their ability to lead. So you have to skip level. You have to give employees a chance to interact with people that are not their immediate boss, but it's their boss's boss and maybe even their boss's boss's boss.
Right.
Creating those opportunities as well. What are some other things that you've seen work around just these face-to-face interactions?
So going back to what you had said is, especially with these national companies, and I say this when I do roundtables with employees,
Mhm.
one of the things we want to see is are some of these issues that you have, is it, something that we have wrong in our employee handbook? Is it national or is
Mhm.
it location based? Because that
Mhm.
makes all the difference, right?
Yeah.
Especially when it comes with, when you have limited resources, limited time, you want to see what those hotspots are. Seeing where, okay, this location is a hotspot because of potentially a supervisor, because potentially the environment, or is this a national thing where employees overall are not happy with this policy or with that? So that is definitely key in identifying, okay, is this national or is it location specific?
Yeah.
And then what was the other one that you asked about the face to face?
Like skip level, being able to talk to,
Talking to them
not just
directly.
deal with your immediate boss.
Right. Because a lot of times, especially when you get hit with the union campaign, right?
Mhm.
What happens is you have supervisors and managers that keep everything within a little bubble because they feel it's a
Mhm.
reflection of themselves.
Right.
And I tell employees, sometimes it's not until that bubble pops when, corporate board might ask, but wait, you told me everything was fine. I mean, I'm looking
Mhm.
at numbers and then I called you and you said everything was great and I thought that matched up. What's really going on? And so sometimes it gives you that falsehood when you just rely on supervisors, managers, directors of a certain area because
Yeah.
they, unfortunately, sometimes they don't want it to reflect negatively
I
on
mean,
their
that's
leadership.
human nature, right? And
Yeah.
that's also part of a corporate culture. Like if you kill the
Yes.
messenger, then the messenger is not going to tell you bad news, right? So like you have to have an
Right.
environment and a culture where we are going to grow. Whatever bad news we get, we're going to grow from. This is
Hmm.
we're not asking to get you in trouble. We're asking because we want to be the best that we can be. We want to create a
Yeah.
great workplace. So that can be a cultural issue. And I think this is a good segue into, you talked about when you do focus groups, there's definitely a time and a place, right? Where
Hmm.
no leader in the organization is going to get the real truth. Like you need to have somebody from outside that people will feel safe, talking to, maybe bringing up the thing that they wouldn't bring up to their boss's boss. Talk a little bit about what that's like.
Right. And that's one of the reasons I love, especially when we do roundtables. I mean, a lot of people say it's old school, but to me, it's an oldie but goodie.
Yeah.
Is to really, as a consultant, you create this environment where people are free to talk and express themselves. Right. And so hearing them vent about things, sometimes they bring up stuff that supervisors, managers didn't even think about. Right. Because a lot of times, again, they have, supervisors, managers, they have a lot on their plate, a lot to deal with, right? And sometimes they may overlook these issues that they felt were really small, but they've grown and they've festered. And so in having these roundtables and having these conversations, people start bringing stuff up. Sometimes, again, going old school, like I will writes up on a board, put it up on a board. So when people walk in and they see that someone already brought that up, that's an issue at that department. That's an issue in my department too. And so it allows for that conversation to happen, that dialogue. A lot of times it's just allowing them to vent goes a very long way. But then again, the most important thing, especially for credibility, is obviously documenting that it's all down and then following up and letting them know, hey, this is what came up, not just in your department, in this department, that department. These are things that we want to focus on. This is our game plan. And it makes people feel like they have a voice, that they have a say of what happens, of what's important. And it just empowers them. And that is what you want, because it empowers them to make the company better. And everyone benefits from that.
I think it's important to make it now. What you do is first of all, that like if you ask people what they think and then you don't do anything with that, like you're worse off than not asking in the first place. And not asking in the first place is terrible, but asking and then not doing anything about it is even worse. Then once you do it, though, this is the big mistake employers make. I see it all the time, and it comes from this place of like, well, yeah, I mean, we fixed it. It was an issue. Like that's what we're supposed to do. We're not going to throw a parade every time we fix an issue that someone complained about. Well, that is the totally wrong way of thinking about it, right? What you're trying to do is to make sure that people understand that when an issue or a complaint or a suggestion is made, we take it seriously, we do something about it, and that we want to encourage you to do that again the next time you have an issue, complaint, or a concern. And so if you're not advertising like, hey, this works, this is what helps us get better, and doing it on the regular, people aren't going to, first of all, they're not going to make suggestions. And then God forbid you're in a union campaign where you're like, hey, we have a direct relationship. You can tell us what you think and we're going to fix things. Well, if I haven't experienced that, then I don't care about your direct relationship. Like it has no value to me because I've never really seen it work. So advertising it also is explaining the value of this privilege that you have to have this direct relationship with your team. And if you're not advertising that, it just doesn't have any value.
Right. And I always tell companies, especially during a union campaign, a union always likes to spotlight the negative. And companies, we don't do a good job in highlighting the positive. Because that way, when the union, as a union organizer, comes and knocks on your door, comes and talks to you and says, but your company doesn't do this, doesn't do that. I mean, when you've been highlighting the positive stuff that you do, it makes the employee think, wait, no, but we do have this. This did happen, and this was the reaction to it. And so it puts that wall where the union can't go through, because you're like, well, no, I have this example, and I remember at a time this happened. And so it's really important to really highlight the positive things the company is doing, the follow-ups, all that kind of stuff. Because the union is quick to put a spotlight on all the negative. And then what happens too, especially when, let's just say something is unit-based or department-based, and we don't highlight that, right? Then other units, departments may not even know that something happened and something was done. To them, it was like, well, I heard that they brought this up. I don't know what ended up happening. And so it's really important to just really put that out there.
Yeah. And people assume the worst, right?
Oh, yeah.
People assume the worst. It's like, well, I heard they had that issue and they didn't do squat about it. And so that's just an example. Like, even if you did the right thing, if no one knows you did the right thing, then it's very easy to just assume you didn't do anything about it.
Let me give you a really quick example is it was a hospital, three different locations. And what they wanted was, especially in the ER, more security. And so this particular place, that's what they wanted. And they brought in more security and they brought in metal detectors, but they never like put, highlighted or told, the whole hospital, like, look, this is what we did. You brought up this issue. This is what we did. And so the other two locations, they were like, well, they brought it up and nothing was done. But it was simply because we didn't say, look, we not only did we get more security, but we got metal detectors. And so it's just really important again, because the union as an organizer, I'll go to those other locations and say, they don't care about your safety. They brought it up and it wasn't until we showed up that they started putting stuff. And so I take ownership of that when as a union organizer. So it's just really important to really highlight that.
Great example. And it's totally right. If you don't take credit for it, then you are vulnerable to that, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, inside, outside. So internal vulnerability, and I call this like shoot yourself in the foot vulnerability. So the mistakes that you make, besides, we've already talked about focus groups and surveys and talking to your employees. Are there other signs of internal vulnerability that you like to look at?
It's how approachable are your leaders? Because I have a lot of campaigns as a labor consultant where you have managers and supervisors that say, I didn't hear anything. I didn't know this was happening. And that's a big red flag because it's like, well, are you not creating an environment yourself where people feel comfortable talking to you and asking you questions? And so looking at that is very, are they coming to you? And it doesn't have to be serious questions. It's are they coming to you and asking you about, a certain team, about this, that, just having that ability to have that communication. That's one of the things or I think one of the most important ones that I look at.
I would say, and this relates to that, but it's like words are words. What are the actions? Like what behavior things are happening that tell us either that a leader's doing a good job or a leader's doing a bad job? And so those are things like, so one example related to what you just said is, does this leader raise issues above, that their department is facing? Like if you have a leader that is raising those issues, first of all, their team is coming to them with the issues and they are advocating on behalf of their team. Like those are behavioral things. I don't care what the issue is. Just the fact that is happening here and it's not happening over here is a behavioral sign that this leader gets it and this leader may not. That's one.
Right.
Voting with your feet. So if you have turnover and people are leaving the company, particularly if like one department seems to have higher turnover than anywhere else, that's a red flag signal. And that's a behavior-based signal. So one of the things that I like to tell companies when they're, companies come to us and they want to, I want to have a heat map or I want to have like a vulnerability assessment dashboard or whatever. And look, we help put those together, but the most important thing is just, you probably don't need to measure a bunch of things, right? It's like, what are some things that you already measure, that you already have access to? Don't create a bunch of new measures. Just find these basic things that are going to show you behaviors that people are not engaged, which also can relate, you brought up earlier, right? Quality, safety, those are objectively observable things that are signals that like things are working in this department, but maybe not working as well in this other department, especially again, if there's differences between departments. Like, so that's one of the things that I coach people. I think, surveys have their place, focus groups and rounding and, just stand up, creating a place for input during your daily stand-up meetings. And those are all different places that you can receive the input. But the key thing to me is just, what are you doing with that?
What's interesting is you bring up daily stand-ups, and I always encourage that. You would see that a lot in huddles in nursing, and you're seeing it more and more. And it's you can tell an effective leader by how their stand-up is ran. Sometimes it's not even ran by the leader. It's their manager or supervisor. It's by someone else. They take turns. They bring stuff up. You could tell the interactive ones versus, when I'm walking around kind of seeing how things are going, managers that just read things, any questions, nope, that's it. And they just leave it at that. And so when I meet with supervisors and managers and we do these trainings, what's very telling, and I always say, I ask a supervisor, tell me 5 things about your employee. Random,
Hmm.
has nothing to do with work. And managers, I say, tell me 3 things because they tend to have a bigger scope, bigger group. And these are things like, what's their favorite baseball team? Go Dodgers,
Hmm.
right? How many kids do they have? Where are they from? What language do they speak? And when a supervisor can tell me at least 5 things outside of work, I know they're a good supervisor.
Yeah.
And I know there's communication. And I know that that employee feels comfortable because this supervisor knows me. So if I go to the supervisor and say, hey, next week, my child, I need a day off because my child has something, some award. And the supervisor says, oh, which one? Or, oh, what award? Or just because they already know.
Yeah.
There's that sense of connection. And when an organizer comes up to them and tries to break that connection and make this person to be the bad guy, the bad
Hmm.
person, it's hard for an organizer to do that because this person knows me. This person knows I have kids. This person gave me
Yep.
the opportunity to take the next day, whatever off. And it's just that important to have that kind of relationship. You're not
Great
best
stuff.
friends, but it's just, something. They're always
Right.
wearing a Raider
You
jersey.
care.
So I know they're a Raider. Yes. And it's these little things that go a very long way for employees. And it's
Yeah.
it's key for us to be reminded because a lot of times supervisors, managers, companies just, they take it more of an executive level and they think, well, like you said, we have this program, if we do this, we do that. And sometimes it's just that basic human connection that goes a long way. And it goes a long way because then it stops someone like me as an organizer to try to break that because it's already been established, the credibility is there, and it's really important.
Yeah. Great stuff. So good. All right. So there's the internal vulnerability, but external also has a
Hmm.
component.
It
And
does.
you, as an organizer, would sort of size up companies about like where should I attack? Like, what are the kinds of things that might indicate? So externally, if a union is kind of looking at companies, what are the things that they're doing there that a company could also be trying to understand about their own locations?
So a lot of times is, and I always use the example of warehouses because warehouses
Mhm.
seem to be clumped at a certain place, or trucking yards clumped
Yeah.
at a certain place, right? And if we have one location that has the union in there, we may start going to, just walking around, seeing the other locations and kind of picking to see if there are any issues there. I remember as an organizer, we were doing take uh, take hall, and we were going after Ag West, and they would all fuel at a certain place so that we would be there and catch these other companies. Evans
Yeah.
was one of them. I forgot the name of the other one. And we would start, talking to them there, seeing what those issues are. And sometimes they might have been just at that moment. A person might have been upset and said, "Oh, they gave me a really long route." And I'm like, okay, mental note. They
Hmm.
have long routes, which means long hours, which means are they getting their breaks? Are they not getting their breaks? So we
Yeah.
would start looking at other places. So that's in organizing, that's what you do. You start targeting places within the industry externally, kind of seeing, is this a place where there's vulnerability and I can move in.
Yeah. I think that, and then the lesson for employers is you got to be aware
Hmm.
of like what's
Always be
going
aware.
on, in your neighborhood, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So, and there's a lot of, we collect a lot of data about this, but also just paying attention to the news. If you do share a like location with other employers, having them on your Google alert, being aware of like what's going on with those organizations, even if they're not like a direct competitor, if you got a distribution center that's surrounded by unionized distribution centers, I got news for
Hmm.
you. Your distribution center is going to be looked at as a target. You might have a strong internal culture, not being avoided. They're going to attempt, and they will continue to kick the tires until the point where you take your eye off the ball, and then at that point you are going to have an organizing campaign. Yeah, so that like there's those kinds of those kinds of things you want to pay attention to. Sometimes it's industry, right?
Yes. And you have to pay attention to those things. And again, a lot of times we don't think about that stuff just because we're not, as managers, supervisors, people may not be trained to look at that stuff. But
Hmm.
there was a company that whenever they were short staffed, they would, bring people in that were at another location that was unionized. And, you bring that in, and
Yeah.
that it might work well because they're looking, oh, the company gives you guys all this. Or it could be like, you guys are missing this, and we
Hmm.
have that over here, or we get paid this. So it's just, you have to be very understand, like you said, everything that's going around. Who are you bringing in? Who are you
Hmm.
right next to? What's going on within this community? Do we have a worker center that just popped up and it's called Warehouse Workers United, and they're focusing on warehouse workers?
Right.
Like, these are the
Yep.
things you need to be aware of. Are there salts that are
Yeah.
coming in? Are we getting an application for a cookie company and this person has a master's in political science?
Hmm.
Now, you might think, oh, that would be a red flag. You'd be surprised of how many times people are just like, well, they just want a job. Let's bring them in, without knowing that there's an alternative motive.
Yeah. I mean, especially when the job market's tight. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lot of pressure to just hire and not really pay close attention to that, and
Uh-huh.
that can be a vulnerability as well. Well, that's great advice. I think so we'll try to land the plane here. So they, the I think around vulnerability assessment, what advice? I'll ask you the same question that we had the last episode around, what advice would you give if I'm trying to be less vulnerable a year from now than I am right now, and I don't really have like a good system in place for vulnerability assessment? What would you encourage me to do as an employer, as just sort of my first, second, third step around doing a
Steps.
better job of this?
It's it all starts with just opening up those communications. If it's a survey, and again, this is very entry level. If it's a survey, if it's going around and talking to the employees, but just kind of getting a feel of what's out there, and then making them feel comfortable that this is something that you're starting, that you're out there and you're listening and you're talking. It's just key, that communication, and starting that communication. Again, if it's, having a survey, if it's showing up, let's just say the HR person showing up at a stand up, and just talking, and just making people feel comfortable that this is something that they're going to start. I think that is definitely key. And then when looking at the vulnerability, you take it to the next level, where it's like, okay, what departments am I, like you said earlier, turnaround, retention is low. What areas do I have most workplace injuries? Because we forget
Hmm.
that. When people are not happy working in a place, they don't always follow the rules and they get
Yeah.
injured. So,
Or get
where is that
distracted.
happening?
Yep.
Exactly. And start looking at those things and just building, what departments am I seeing as red flags? What are the issues? And just start really deep diving in, and start looking at these things. And then of course the following up when
Yeah.
you do fix some of these things, or just verbalize, because a lot of times someone may pose an issue and it may take HR 2 weeks, but after 1 week the employee's like, they forgot about me, no one cares, and
Hmm.
that runs like fire. But just
Yeah.
following up, sometimes if you have a board where I've used before, red light, yellow light, green light. Like, this is something that we can work on immediately. Yellow is going to take some time. Red is going to take a lot more because we have to go through this level, that level. But following up is very key. But I think those are some of the entry level things. Is just starting that conversation,
Yeah.
and making people feel comfortable with expressing themselves and having that voice.
Yeah, I'll emphasize that last part. I think most companies have like ways to listen. I mean, and if you don't have ways to listen, okay, obviously, like, start there. Like, what are the different vehicles and different channels that we're going to create for people to be able to
Mhm.
talk to us? And it can't just be one. It's good that there's an anonymous way to do it, but it shouldn't always be anonymous. Like, so anyway, we'll get the channels right. That's kind of
Yeah.
just table stakes. The most important thing that you can do, this is on internal vulnerability, the most important thing you can do is keep that running list of issues, and then explaining, how did we fix them? First of all, fix
Mhm.
them, and then explain to everybody that you fixed them. And ideally, I love, keep it in a place like you just said. Keep it in a place where everyone can see it, right? Hold us accountable. We
Yeah.
say we're going to resolve your issues. Hold us accountable. Did we fix the issue? Is this still an issue, right? We do this like in our own company, we have a running issues list. That's what it's called. It's part of our, we run this company on EOS, and a big part of their process is this idea of an issues list. Pretty much any meeting we go into, we start by, let's take a look at the issues list. What are, is there anything that we need to add to the issues list? But it's just part of our regular dialogue. And it's great for a culture because everyone feels comfortable adding to the list. An issue isn't seen as like a bad thing. Everybody has issues. So like, just what are they? And then we prioritize them, which is the just kind of like red, yellow, green. What are the ones that we can knock out right now? What are ones that we're going to have to work a little harder on? What are ones that are like a budget decision or it's going to require some sort of change in our structure or our rules? But like having all of that there, visible, explaining what we're doing about it, like that culturally transforms how people feel about their company.
And another thing, as you were talking, popped up in my mind is we also have to give managers, supervisors the tools in communication because some supervisors are really good at communicating, some are not. And I say that because I have had a situation where supervisors just say, well, corporate said no. Well, leadership said no. They said no. Explaining without, sometimes they just blame them and they never even asked. But then, as an organizer, when I come in, because they're the big bad corporation. Well, corporation doesn't let you. And the employees are like, oh, you're right. My supervisor said they didn't let. So it's giving them those communication skills to supervisors and managers to where it's like, you know what, guys, here's the situation. They said this and this is the reason, or they said this. And when we look at it and explain it to how it affects the department, and it's key. It is definitely key.
Yeah. I could not agree more. I just think that, yes, super. And that's a sign of a weak leader. But if you're not paying attention, that leader actually looks great. Right? My employees love me. My employees if you ask your employees, they're going to say, we think our supervisor does a great job. He or she goes to bat for me. Like they're going to say all of the right things, but that supervisor does not understand that they are actually part of management. And so they will throw the company under the bus as a way to still be friends with everyone in their department. That's not leadership. And too many weak leaders kind of get away with that behavior but that's you have to be on the lookout for that as a company and make sure that those leaders are trained, that they get to the point where they feel like they can carry the flag for the company, they want to carry the flag for the company. That's as important as getting your first line production people carrying the flag.
It's having your supervisor, if they feel they are supported, if they feel that they're given the tools, which is key. If they feel that they're given the tools to be able to be effective communicators, to be able to go to bat for their employees, it's very important for them to feel the same way. Because even as a labor consultant, you do have a lot of union sympathizers within supervisors and managers because they don't feel they have that support from the company, because they don't feel that, anyone listens to them. They don't feel like they have the tools necessary to really, be productive. And so it's important.
Yeah, that's a great spot to end on. I think, just to sum up, so it's really important for if you do want to be less vulnerable a year from now, it's really critical to think about all the different ways that you can identify issues, that you can resolve issues, that you can communicate, that you're solving them. Evelyn, I really appreciate having you and your wisdom on this. And thanks again for joining us on the show. All right. See ya.